Good morning, everyone. Professor Hoodie here, coming to you with some rainy day reflections and review on the importance of being earnest from this previous Monday. We only had 2 people pop in for the Zoom class on Monday, and with 2 people and a teacher, the quorum is a bit different than when you've got, even a small group of more people, like 4 or 5. And so I felt it would be somewhat unfair to record the class with just us 3 and post that as a teaching resource, because it almost shifts the balance, right? When there's a small group and I'm the one asking the questions and prompting and cultivating discussion, and you're all kind of feeding on each other's answers, I'm still teaching and you guys are being the class. But when it's just a couple of people, the balance of discussion is different, and I didn't want either of those 2 students to feel like basically in being the only 2 discussion partners in the video that they were kind of having to do some of the teaching, or that they were almost unfairly exposed. So we had a lovely chat amongst the 3 of us, really productive, good stuff. I actually feel like I learned some useful things from our conversation, and those 2 students get the benefit of that time for their own, which is lovely. But this all being the case, I thought that I would post my own sort of review video, going through some of the discussion questions that I had planned for our Monday class, throwing some literary terms at you to help you in your sort of percolating on the importance of being earnest. And I really do hope to see as many of you as can make it on a week-by-week basis in some of our upcoming classes. That said, just to reiterate, Zoom attendance is not mandatory in this course. This is purely an asynchronous course. The Zoom classes are there for those who feel that they benefit from the live discussion opportunity that a Zoom class affords. So no pressure, but we had a great time. Are there any other housekeeping notes that I want to put at the front of this? Right, I will throw this up on the publicly so that everybody's aware. But this upcoming week of Monday the 23rd through to what I guess would be Wednesday the 25th, this is a split week because we're doing a novel study where you had a choice of which novel to read. So one group will be on Monday discussing whichever novel, and one group will be on Wednesday discussing whichever novel. Same time as usual, 10:30 to 11:45-ish. And I'll post the specific group assignments on publicly. But launching into the importance of being earnest, I hope that you guys enjoyed this comedy. I would love to see some little comments on publicly, just about your experience of it, how many of you maybe watched the movie in addition to reading the text. But for the purposes of this video, I'm kind of just going to go through the discussion questions that I had planned and pitch them to you for your contemplation. You read this play in your Norton Anthology Major Authors, Volume 2. And fortunately, that means that you had a little preface on Oscar Wilde as a writer and a public figure of his time by the Norton Anthology editors. You also had a very short little sort of headpiece on the play itself. And I believe it was in that little preface to the play, there was this quote given to us. Oscar Wilde says of this play, The Importance of Being Earnest, he says that, quote, "It has as its philosophy that we should treat all the trivial things of life seriously, and all the serious things of life with sincere and studied triviality." One of the things that I wanted to sort of throw out for discussion was, where do you see this philosophy borne out in the play? Where in different scenes and character actions do you see the characters treating serious things as though they are trivial or unimportant, trivializing serious, important material? And where do you see them treating serious things with sincere and studied triviality? The other question that I had stemming from that quote is kind of interrogating the legitimacy of the quote itself, because Oscar Wilde he was a member, or at least publicly, on the face of things. He claimed to be a member and a devotee of this movement during the Victorian period, the art for art's sake movement, or aestheticism, meaning that art is not accountable to any external standards of morality or quality, or like there are no external rules that get to dictate what art should be. Art must only be art. All it has to be is beautiful and expressive of the artist's purpose. Meaning is inconsequential, whether it's good or bad, right? Oscar Wilde would have said something like a book or a play is never good or bad. It is only beautiful or not beautiful, or, a comedy is not good or bad. It's either funny or it's not funny. So when he says this, that the play, The Importance of Being Earnest, has as its philosophy that we should treat all the trivial things of life seriously and all the serious things of life with sincere and studied triviality. Do you think that Oscar Wilde, based on your reading of the play, your exposure to him through the introduction, do you think that the writer really believed in this philosophy? Do you think he really believed that we should treat all the trivial things as very important and all the serious things as totally trivial? One of my questions was, can anyone really say this and mean it? Is it possible for this statement to be made sincerely? If serious things like the moral philosophy of art are to be treated with sincere and studied triviality or with disregard, then how can you talk seriously about the philosophy of the play? He says, this play has as its philosophy, blah, 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 blah. But that point in and of itself, the idea that the play has an underlying guiding philosophy, well, that would contravene the statement that follows, right? A play that is art for art's sake need not have any particular philosophy at all. And this is sort of one of the things that critics and historians and literary scholars have observed about Oscar Wilde a lot, is that he sort of, in some ways it seems like on the surface, he sort of lived by the leeway that this notion of art for art's sake bought him. If nothing particularly has to mean anything, if it only has to sound good, then you're not accountable for the consistency of your statements, the consistency between your statements and your actions. You're not really accountable for anything but how you carry yourself off, as an aesthetic or an aestheticist. That's your whole job, is to be aesthetic, whatever that's supposed to mean. One of the students in our little mini jam on Monday asked what I thought was a very thoughtful question about, they asked me, do you think that Oscar Wilde espoused these views or made this claim about the importance of being earnest because he was gay, because he was queer in a society where one cannot be queer? And you'll have read, I think, in your, apologies. We're far enough into the video now that I'm not going to stop and redo, but I am sorry for that. You will have read in your introductions to Oscar Wilde that criminalization of homosexual acts was comparatively recent during Oscar Wilde's lifetime. Now, homosexuality being taboo, being like not the thing and not something that you admit to in public, that was old. But it being criminally punishable, that was fairly recent, at least, in living memory. So, yeah, this student asked, do you think that he maybe said this thing or chose to live by this superficial philosophy of art for art's sake, where you can't be interrogated on any basis of sort of moral consistency because he was gay? And what I kind of said was, it's a really dangerous game to attribute, reasons for what an artist does in their work to the artist's personal life. When you start drawing those very direct causal connections, it gets messy, correlation does not equal causation. But it seems a reasonable question to ask. If I was a person who had to live a double life in Victorian England, where the superficial is all that anybody really cares about, right? Victorian culture claims to be all about decency and morality and chivalry and, manners, and it's like the correctness, right? Social correctness and courtesy in society is so intense right now. And yet, as long as you behave correctly, as long as you say the right things, that's really all anybody cares about. I mean, look at the British global empire. It's raging around the world, doing all the terrible things that empires do. And yet, in terms of the superficial veneer, as long as England comports itself superficially on the world stage in the right way and says the right things, it gets to be hailed as this, progressive empire, this beacon of development. So yes, where this kind of talk about what should be trivialized and what should be taken seriously comes from, how it reflects on Wilde's own experiences, how it reflects on Victorian society. These are all things worth chewing on as we're reading The Importance of Being Earnest. There's a particular quote that we looked at while we were in our discussions on Monday. I believe it's in the very last scene of the play where Algernon wants to marry Cecily, and Lady Bracknell is all for it, why not? But Jack, or Ernest, who is Cecily's guardian, he's not going to let this happen at all, because Lady Bracknell has told him that he may not marry her daughter Gwendolen. Yes, many, many love intrigues going on here. So he's using his control over Cecily's, life as a sort of bargaining chip to convince Lady Bracknell to let him marry Gwendolen. But she doesn't consider him to be good enough for her, for whatever reasons. And basically he ends up saying, this is all well within your own control. If you allow me to marry Gwendolen, certainly I will allow Cecily to marry Algernon. And, so there's this bargain going on. And Lady Bracknell is currently, she's still in resistance mode, right? She's about to leave. She says, "Gwendolen, the time approaches for our departure. We have not a moment to lose. As a matter of form, Mr. Worthing, I had better ask you if Miss Cardew has any little fortune." Basically, she's asking, does Cecily have any money to her name? And Jack says, "Oh, about £130,000 in the funds, that's all. Goodbye, Lady Bracknell. So pleased to have seen you." Right? He's like, yes, you were going, farewell. But of course, this changes Lady Bracknell's mind. She finds out £130,000, by the way, is quite a lot of money in the Victorian period. Like, quite a lot of money. And so Lady Bracknell perks up her ears at this and goes, "What? The girl is rich? This changes everything." She says, sitting down again, "A moment, Mr. Worthing. £130,000, and in the funds. Miss Cardew seems to me a most attractive young lady, now that I look at her." Miss Cardew's fortune seems a most attractive fortune now that you look at it. But that's not how we say it. "Miss Cardew seems a most attractive young lady now that I look at her. Few girls of the present day have any really solid qualities, any of the qualities that last and improve with time. We live, I regret to say, in an age of surfaces." And things go on. This line from Lady Bracknell is really telling. This is really kind of bringing out the whole thesis of the play, is that the Victorian age was one of surfaces. I mean, when Lady Bracknell says this, it's totally hypocritical and it means nothing, right? She's saying she regrets that we live in an age of surfaces and that she hungers for young women who have really solid, qualities of character. But of course, that's not true. All she cares about is Cecily's fortune. All she cares about is how things look or practical advantage. But whether Lady Bracknell can be taken seriously in saying this or not, you almost hear the author, Oscar Wilde, you almost overhear his voice, or it's almost like he's standing behind Lady Bracknell at that moment. The author is standing behind the character going, like, that's how it is though, isn't it? That's real. We do live in an age of surfaces. She may not mean it, but I do. And at the end of the day, when she says, we live, I regret to say, in an age of surfaces, he's kind of looking at the audience too and going like, do you regret it? Are you going to leave this play saying, wow, that was a terrible play, it had no substance whatsoever? Or are you going to leave saying, that was hilarious? And the costumes, oh my goodness, it was so beautiful. And the dialogue, like, it was so witty and snappy. Like, you had a great time. You don't mind that we live in an age of surfaces. How many of us really mind? How many of us are perfectly content to live our lives abiding by the laws of surface level performance and retaining the depth of our personal lives for personal time outside of the public eye? This is a lot of what's going on, and it all kind of ties in to that first quote, that the importance of being earnest has as its philosophy, whether it's ironic or it's sincere philosophy, that people should treat all the trivial things of life seriously and all the serious things of life with sincere and studied triviality. Moving on. Another question or talking point that I wanted to sort of throw out to you all in thinking about the importance of being earnest. Again, I believe it comes from the preface to the play. The editors of the Norton Anthology say that, like other Victorian masterpieces of the absurd, and we'll talk about that word in a minute, absurd or absurdism, the importance of being earnest, quote, empties manners and morals of their underlying sense to create a nominalist world where earnest is not a quality of character, but a name. A world where words, to paraphrase the author Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland, mean what you choose them to mean, neither more nor less. Now, a few words in there worth unpacking. Nominalist means in name only, in name but not in substance. So someone who is nominally a Christian, that's maybe the label that they would use or would own to, but they don't necessarily hold the beliefs of a Christian or practice, the day-to-day faith rituals of a Christian. It's just kind of the word that most closely approximates them. They would be nominally Christian. Or somebody who was married and is now separated and is going to get a divorce but isn't officially divorced yet. They are nominally married. Technically, legally, they're still married, and so they are in name, they are married, but in spirit and in substance, the marriage has dissolved. So that's what nominal means. The French word for name is nom, so nominally. So the importance of being earnest empties manners and morals of their underlying sense to create a nominalist world, where earnest is not a quality of character, simply a name. And words, to paraphrase Lewis Carroll, mean what you choose them to mean, neither more nor less. Again, sort of typical follow-up, where do we see these effects borne out in the play? This idea of a nominalist world where ideals, high ideals like earnest, which means sincere, become sort of superficial and meaningless. There's there's a part towards the beginning where Jack and Algernon are arguing about whether Gwendolen and Cecily would get along. And Jack says, oh, I'm sure that within half an hour of knowing each other, they'll be calling each other sister. And Algernon says, women only ever call each other sister after they've called each other a lot of other things first. And then, of course, towards the end of the play, Gwendolen ends up crashing a tea party with Cecily, and they both think that they've been somehow wronged by the other because they think that they're meant to be engaged to the same person, and there's all kinds of confusion, and it's just a festival of throwing shade, this tea party, right? Where something like Cecily said, when I see a spade, I call it a spade. And then Gwendolen says, I myself have never seen a spade. It is evident that our backgrounds have been roundly different, or widely different, or something like that, right? Which is hilarious, because a spade, of course, is a shovel. So when Gwendolen says, when Cecily says, when I see a spade, I call it a spade, she's using a figure of speech. But then Gwendolen says, I have never even seen a spade. I've never seen a shovel. I'm so high-born and so noble and so ladylike that I've never laid eyes on a shovel in my life. And this is how she's trying to basically flex on Cecily and say that she's better. And it's, just like two prim ladies sitting at a tea table saying things like, I myself have never seen a spade. Phenomenal. It goes back and forth in this way for some time, right? I asked for bread and butter, and you have given me cake. It's just excessive. And then eventually the men blunder in and all the things come out, and they figure out that they've both been completely bamboozled by some very badly behaving boys. And they look at each other and they make up. They realize, oh, we have both been wronged here. We didn't wrong each other. We've been wronged by these men. And suddenly Gwendolen, they're making up, and Gwendolen says something to Cecily like, and will you always call me sister? And the audience overhears, they go, oh my God, he was right. Algernon was right. So coming back to the nominalist world, sisterhood, womanly solidarity in a bond that is stronger than blood ties, that's a very serious thing. To make a friendship or an alliance that you give the name of sisterhood, that's a very serious ideal. It's one of the most powerful forces in the known world, right? Women helping women is how things get done. But we've taken this idea of sisterhood and made it very thin and very shallow, very nominal. It's just a word to be tossed around when we're on good terms. When we're on good terms, when we're not biting each other in the back, we call each other sister to make a show of how close we are. It's so frivolous. That's one example, but there are many, many, many examples, including, as this quote points out, the titular Earnest, right? Not a quality of character, but a name. Other places that we see this phenomenon played out in the play of manners and morals being emptied of their underlying sense to create a world of the superficial. There's a theme of short-sightedness in the play. Gwendolen talks about how, Lady Bracknell, her mother, raised her to be very short-sighted, and so she's always squinting at things through her glasses. It becomes almost literal, right? Like she's nominally short-sighted. Well, no, does that count as an instance of nominalism? I think it counts as an instance of putting an emphasis on the superficial, right? Short-sightedness is an ability only to perceive the present, the here and now, the superficial, as opposed to the underlying depths of things or even the long term. And this comes up lots of different places in the play, like the governess to Cecily is named Miss Prism, as in the prisms in a heavy set of glasses, and she's a bit sort of bumbling and short-sighted and not exactly the cultivating mentor that you would hope her to be, right? Instead of teaching Cecily her lessons, she's sort of pipping off to go for walks with the priest that she has a crush on. That's another theme that's worth looking at in this play, is the theme of short-sightedness or difficulty with vision, literal vision. Another one of the questions that I had, let me just make sure I've got this right. The first line of my question, like other Victorian masterpieces of the absurd, the importance of being earnest creates this nominalist world. I wanted to talk a little bit about what the absurd is, because it constitutes a preface to something that we'll deal with a lot in modernism. Oscar Wilde is sort of late Victorian, sometimes labeled pre-modern. He's a bit of a borderland figure between the Victorian period and the modernist art movement. And his embrace of absurdity, absurdism, is part of that bridge. The importance of being earnest could be considered an example, an early example of theater of the absurd. So absurdism is intentionally ridiculous or bizarre behavior of a character or bizarre character. It's also the belief that human beings exist in a purposeless, chaotic universe, that there is no overarching meaning of life, there is no grand purpose. The world is senseless and cruel, and the universe doesn't care. There is no rhyme or reason to anything. We're all just dancing our way to the grave for as long as we're here. And within that sort of framework,